On the Writer Talks today, I bring to you yet another promising poet, short story writer, and a novelist who is on the brink of completing her debut novel, Aisha Hamid, the young, talented writer from Lahore, whose writing primarily focuses on women's issues. She is a Commonwealth Scholar and a staunch feminist. Having completed her master's in gender and development, Aisha's works primarily focus on the trials and tribulations of being women. In fact, she tells me that her writing is essentially a form of her activism. During a recent conversation, Aisha told me that social media can actually be used very effectively for women who wish to reclaim their lives, who want to regain control of their lives, in fact. She practices what she preaches, and on her Instagram page, she had launched a small campaign to celebrate single women and to celebrate our mothers before they had us, as she affirms. Following this campaign, Aisha tells me that several women wrote to her stating that they now look at their mothers as separate individuals, individuals with their distinct voices, fears, dreams, and desires. Aisha tells me that people like Sahar Habib, Shehzan Malik, and Amna Chaudhry form the Mod Squad, who are leading voices in the female space for Pakistan and its women. She brims with pride at the mention of Aurat Manch, which they have on the 8th of every March. And she speaks gloriously about the social movement, Girls at Dhabas, that was started to reclaim public space for women, where women were opting to drink tea at the local stalls that are primarily dominated by men. Further, she says that women have taken to playing cricket on the streets to reclaim public space and to generate visibility of women in the public arena, truly breaking the proverbial glass ceiling that pervades our everyday lives. Aisha's easy demeanor, high vivaciousness, and a ready smile puts anyone at ease. And our recent tete a tete was more of a conversation between two long lost friends than as two writers from two distinct nations. So, for this and lots more, to know more about this vibrant young talent from Pakistan, let's dive into the second segment of the Writer Talks. But before that, please like, share, and subscribe so that I can continue to engage you and bring to you writers from across the world. I once again exhort each one of my subscribers, please get one more subscriber. Each one of you get one more. So until next time, ahoy. Enjoy watching the conversation with Aisha Hamid, the talented writer from Lahore. Ahoy, Aisha. Welcome to the Writer Talks.
Hello, Asha. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It's a complete pleasure, and I'm so delighted to see you. Finally, we get to meet.
I know, me too. I've been looking forward to this for a while now.
Right. So, to give a brief introduction to Aisha Hamid, I mean, already there is so much that you have accomplished. So, you're a poet, Commonwealth Scholar, alumnus of Warwick University, short story writer, academic, feminist. You don several hats.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Now, if you were to list this in order of your personal preference from among
Hmm.
these multiple hats that you don, which would be the first and which would be the second?
I think being a feminist would be the first because that's something that I identify with the most.
Right.
And being a writer would be second because I'm still trying to, get my book out there, trying to write it first and then to get it out there. So I think I'm a feminist through and through. A writer, I think I'll be 100% once I get my book out there.
Well, being a then you would be a published writer, but you already are a
Yeah,
writer. That's
that's true.
besides the
I
point.
agree with that. That's true. But that's how you gain respect in the literary community by being published.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. It's very again. I'm terribly thrilled that you are a feminist too. So how did you come about that?
That's a very interesting question. So I think always knew that I was a feminist because I was always uncomfortable with the kind of discrimination that I experienced at home as well in the broader society. So when in my sophomore year at LUMS, I took this course, Gender and Power. That's when my eyes actually opened and I realized that I've been a feminist. And those theories, those gender theories really spoke to me. And I realized that I had this fire or desire in me to do something for women, for myself first, I feel. And that's when I decided to label myself as a feminist. So yeah, that was would be I think 7 8 years ago. Yeah.
Right. No, this is really nice and ingratiating to know that you voluntarily and primarily identify yourself as a feminist, because there are many women who themselves are
I
apologetic about the word, and it seems like a taboo for them.
Yeah, that's just because the misconception that feminism has received. But feminism is a political movement. It's an ideology as well, and it has so many different categories like radical, liberal. For instance, I'm an Islamic feminist. I'm also a transnational and post-colonial feminist. So I mean, you can identify with different kinds of feminism ones that go with your ideas in your context. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge movement. You can't reduce feminism to just one or two women who are performing it in a particular way. That's how I
That's
feel.
true. That's correct.
Mm.
In fact, since I teach, there are a couple of my male students who have voluntarily told me that they are staunch feminists. You know,
That's
gender
so
studies
great.
is one of the units that we do, and as part of their curriculum, and they're very pro feminism in that sense. Invariably, many of the texts are these, and they're able to connect with that.
That's brilliant. I think men claiming that they are feminists is one of the most significant things that can happen in this
True.
century, I feel. And
True.
not just claiming to be, also trying to be one.
Trying to be one, absolutely. Having said that, how different, or yeah, actually, how different is feminism, or in the sense, how deep seated is patriarchy in Pakistan? Has it changed?
Um,
Is it evolving?
I'm not sure, but it's pretty deep seated. That's very true because I also grew up in a very patriarchal and then a religious and a conservative household, and that's only an epitome of the entire society. It's very deep seated, that's true. As for if things are changing, I think that they are, but at a very slow pace. I mean, women are now speaking up. Women have realized that they do have a voice. They do not need anyone else to empower them. They can empower themselves. And they are speaking up. Things are changing, largely because women have decided to speak up,
True.
even though men have tried to take their voice away. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, yeah, the fact that for instance I was not allowed to go abroad for masters, but then I fought for it and I got the scholarship, and then nobody had any excuse anymore, I feel. So yeah, we have to fight for things here, I feel, and it can be very exhausting, very tiring, but I think that fighting, that struggle kind of gives my life meaning as well, and that is how we snatch things that are our own in the first place already. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. It's something that one is entitled to. It's not something that you have to be given or permitted,
Exactly.
so to say.
Exactly. That's
I
true.
think one of the most brutal forms of feminism in that sense would not feminism, sorry. The one of the most brutal forms of oppression is when women themselves do not realize that they are being
Yeah.
subjugated. This
Yeah, that's
subliminal and subtle subjugation that they
that's
undergo.
true. That's the internalization of patriarchy, and that's happening at so many levels, at the social, legal, economic, political, all levels, that you internalize it. So I think to realize that you are a feminist, to realize that women deserve better, that's the first step.
Absolutely.
And
I
then the
think there
struggle
was
only
a
gets harder.
true, and we think
Yeah,
that Western nations are far more progressive and they are up and about with feminism, but that's so not
that's
true. Just
that's
I
not
think two
true.
days back there was yet another demonstration of that with
Yeah,
with the article about Dr. Jill Biden and the
I'm
columnist
sorry, I was not aware of that.
belittling her for
Oh
so
yeah,
for
that one.
retaining the doctorate before her name.
Exactly. I think agency and feminism look very different in different contexts.
Question, yeah.
So I think that feminism and agency, they look very different in different contexts. So we can't really say that one country is more gender equal than others. I mean, they are definitely, because they have, for instance, they're giving education to young women, etc., have legal rights for women, etc. But agency definitely looks very different in different contexts because of this idea of intersectionality, that different women have different privileges as well as oppressions at the same time because of their gender and their race, religion, caste, creed, etc., sexuality, age. So yeah, agency definitely looks very different in many different contexts.
Absolutely. Is that why you speak about your writing being a form of activism in itself?
Yes, I do. I feel women grieve every day because of so many things that they're not allowed to do again, in quote unquote. Uh, so I feel like their bodies are grief. So the only way that I could, for instance, make sense of that loss and that grief that I had to deal with every day is through writing. So writing for me also becomes as a comes as a form of grieving, but then also activism and my agency as well, because then I'm able to challenge all those patriarchal norms and ideas which tell me that I'm this person and they put me in a box. So I'm trying to break away and smash against those walls. So that's why I think writing is very empowering for me in that sense.
Right, fair enough. So then and naturally brings me to my initial question. When and how did you start writing?
I think I was a reader all my life, but then I started writing when I was around 11, I think. And the first serious poem that I wrote was about the loss of my puppo, my aunt. And other than the cat and bat and hat poems that we write when we were kids,
Right.
so that was my first serious poem. And then I started writing, and people liked my poetry. And
Right.
then there was a huge gap in between when I did not write. I think I would blame the internet for that. And but then recently, a few years ago, something very personal happened, and the only way that I could survive was by going back to writing. So
Right.
that's when I started writing poetry seriously, and I started reading a lot of poetry as well. So yeah, that's how I got back to writing.
And we are glad that you did.
Thank you so much.
In fact, during my university days, I read that T.S. Eliot had mentioned somewhere, I can't recall where exactly. He says that anybody who continues to write poetry beyond the age of 24 will remain a poet for a lifetime. I think that
There is
holds
hope.
true. That holds true.
There's
Right.
hope. But
So,
yeah, my style of poetry, I think, also changed because I used to write about trees and nature and rivers and all when I was a kid. But now I started writing about human disasters and obviously patriarchy and feminism. So yeah,
right.
the style of obviously when you grow up, your style changes. Yeah,
True, true. Yeah, naturally, it's hard to remove the writer from their context, and when you see so many things
exactly.
happening around you.
And also, when we were kids, we used to read Dead White Men. I mean, John Keats, etc. So they
Absolutely.
ode to autumn and ode to a nightingale, etc. That's what we started writing about as well. But now that I'm reading more consciously and more South Asian writers, so yeah, my writing style has definitely changed. Yeah.
So, who do you think are your favorite writers in that sense?
My ultimate favorite would be Arundhati Roy, hands down, the god of small things.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, but other than that, I read a lot of different genres. So I read fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. So, for instance, in nonfiction, my academic crush is Chandra Mohanty and
Okay.
her third world feminism. That's under westernized. That's what her essay is called. So that was what I read during when I took that course, Gender and Power, in my sophomore year, and that really I felt like somebody was showing me my soul. I loved it so much. Other than that, I love Asma Barlas's. She's an Islamic feminist.
Right.
I'm reading the patriarchal interpretations of the Quran, so she wrote a very feminist interpretation to some of the most controversial uh, verses of the Holy Quran. I love that book. That changed my life as well. Other than that, I love Chimamanda Adichie. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Yes. And Virginia Woolf and Audre Lorde, all of these amazing feminists that have shaped my thinking as well. But for fiction, I've started getting into East Asian fiction as well,
Mhm.
because again, this all goes back to my university life when I took courses on modern East Asia. So I got into Chinese literature, and then after that, now I'm reading more Korean literature and Japanese as well. So I love Han Ken's The White Book. She's also the one who wrote The Vegetarian. I still have to read that. And I'm reading Kim Ji Young presently, which is a story of a 30 plus year old woman who kind of leaves her marriage and is trying to find her own self. And so, yeah, all of these very empowering feminist writers. So I'm trying to read more female and more women of color, so that I think reading is a very conscious choice that you make. And now that I'm
Absolutely.
done with dead white men,
Absolutely.
I want to read
Absolutely.
exactly. So yeah, as for poetry, when I got back into poetry recently, I started with Khalil Gibran
Okay.
and Rumi. So that was very different from what. But then I really loved Yersa Daily Wards. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's a British poet.
Sorry,
Her
can you come again for the name, please?
Yersa Daily Ward. She's a British poet, and I love her. Bone and the Terrible. So
Okay.
yeah, I read very different kinds of books in that sense.
Really lovely. So, what are you reading currently? That's an extensive list that you have given me. That's fantastic.
Presently, I'm reading Gurmehr Kaur's Small Acts of Freedom.
Okay.
She's a social activist and also a feminist, and she writes about her time, about the time when she faced a lot of backlash from media because she went against the government, the Indian government, by saying that we should not be, there's no one way to be patriotic. And being patriotic by killing other people is not a good way to be one. So that's a really interesting memoir. And I was also recently reading the Mongrel Books of Voices, which is a Pakistani it's the Mongrel Books is a Pakistani publishing company, so that has collected all of these short stories and poems by Pakistani as well as South Asian writers. So yeah, that's what I was reading recently.
That's lovely again. And you're both. You're a poet as well as a short story writer. Which one do
Uh,
you think comes more naturally to you then?
uh, they're both very different. I mean, poetry is more compact and a bit more complex, I feel. And short stories, you have a little bit more room to experiment. But then poetry can also be. I was also reading another book, If They Come For Us by Fatima Asghar, if you have heard of it.
Right.
She experiments with poetry a lot. That made me realize, oh, there's so many different ways of writing poetry, and I've just been restricting myself to just a few different forms.
Right.
So yeah, I think I enjoy writing. I think it depends on the mood I feel. Uh, for me, I would go with poetry if I had to choose, gun to my head.
So you're
Poetry,
more
definitely.
comfortable with poetry in that sense.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. I think Wallam magazine published your poem "Unhappiness" as a poem of the week.
Yes,
What
they
was
did.
the inspiration or the muse behind that? Who was the muse
Uh,
behind that?
Inspiration would be my mother. And like I said, I write about grieving women. So, I mean, I don't know if my mom would see her life that way, but the way I see it, the kind of restrictions that we have had again in the larger society and in my household as well. So that's me trying to, communicate with her and tell her that maybe I also feel that way as well, and maybe there are different ways of being. So yeah, it's a bit, I don't know how to explain it though. But yeah, I think that was me trying to communicate with my mother that, yeah, I'm here with you as well. So
Right.
yeah,
Would you like to read the poem for us, please?
definitely. Let me just fetch it.
Sure, sure.
It's here. Here it is. Okay, it's called Unhappiness. I am Mama's eyes, gray black glassy distant eyes that belong somewhere else, in someone else's face, walking places I can never learn the names of, places I will never visit, freedoms that could have been mine in another lifetime. She's scattered, always anywhere but here. Her life is an injustice. How can I correct it? Where do I begin? Which corner do I grab when I too am anywhere but here? I too run off to places. I attend a million funerals every day. I crunch broken glass between my teeth and wonder why the bleeding doesn't stop. Is this what unhappiness looks like? A woman who's always scattered, scattered like chaff from sifted wheat, like dust particles hovering, like a million drops of perfume. There.
Very powerful words. I think the beauty lies in the simple imagery that you have brought in, but at the same time, it's also so very unique. Like
Thank you so
scattered
much. That's
chaff,
very kind of you.
the farming imagery that you bring in is so unique.
Thank you so much. I've always felt like women are scattered, and I think I was able to finally put that into words. And a lot of women reached out to me and said that this is exactly how they feel about their mom as well and about themselves. So it's great when people can relate to your work. So thank you so much.
Completely my pleasure, actually. Now,
Thank you.
you're also working on a short story, isn't it? And as
Um,
well as a novel. Would you like to speak about that?
I'm not presently working on a short story, but I'm working on a book, yes. So that book is based on that short story which got shortlisted for the Zenith Harun Rashid Prize last year. It's called How Not to Leave, and so far I've kept that title for the book as well. So
Okay.
So that story is about a failing and dysfunctional marriage and the psychological impact that has on a family of five as well as other people from the extended family. Uh, so yeah, it's the story is so far essentially the same, but obviously the endings etc. are going to be different from that short story. So I'm digging deeper into those characters, trying to see their motivations and their backgrounds and why they are the way they are. So I'm trying to not fall into that binary that women can either be victims or villains, because that's an overused trope as well. So I'm trying to move beyond that subjugation to and subversion to patriarchy binary, and because most women fall in between in the gray areas, because there's so many different ways of exercising your genital capacity. So that's what I'm trying to do, and that's the kind of books that I want to read as well, and I have been reading, and so that's the kind of book that I want to write. So yeah, that's the book that I'm working on.
And that must have been a real pat on the back for you being nominated for the Zenith Harun Prize. And
Yes, that was
I
my
believe it's
first
very
book. I think.
prestigious.
Sorry.
I believe it's very prestigious.
It is. So that was my first ever shortlisting, I guess, because I only started out in 2019 and I sent that story and it got shortlisted. So it was, I felt encouraged, I would say, at the least. So yeah,
Right.
I was like, this is something that I can do and should continue doing. So
Fair enough. Now,
yeah.
what about the current pandemic that all of us are enduring? As writers, it's hard not to be affected by the changes and the
That's
transitions
true.
going around. Has it resulted in any particular poem or any thought?
It did actually. I wrote this, I wouldn't say a poem, but a prose poetry kind of thing. And then there was this that Commonwealth writers shared that Rare Swan Press was looking for writers from around the world who could shrink their experience into like 100 words, their experience of going through the pandemic. So kind of reduced that into 100 words and sent that. So that's going to be published as well. Uh, so as for the first part of your question, pandemic has definitely affected me, but in a bad way. I mean, I've seen a lot of writers who have written books, who have written so much during this time because they feel like they have gotten that time to finally sit down and write. For me, it's the opposite. I can't find the motivation to write. So like when I said that I'm a writer, I'm trying to be one because I'm trying to write. Honestly, every day is a struggle. So, I mean, I would say to anyone who's trying to write in the pandemic, if it's difficult for you, it's okay. I mean, your story will come to you. The world can wait. It's okay if
Correct.
you can't write every day because we're going through a pandemic. So, yeah.
Absolutely. But do you write regularly? Do you fix up a particular amount of time every day
Mm,
and go through your
not
craft? Or,
really. I should. That's something I should do. But no, I sometimes I really find it difficult to find the motivation. But yeah, there are days when I do get that get the time to write every day, but then there are days when I have not even looked back at the book. So yeah, it really depends on my mental health, I feel. So,
fair enough. So when you're writing a poem, do you wait for it to come to you in the sense you form it in your head and then you put it down on paper,
uh,
or how is it?
for me, it's very tiny little things in the day that spark something, and then there's a fragment of thought that uh, occurs or comes up, or maybe an inspiration, you can call it. So I write that out immediately in my cell phone, in my notes, that phrase or that thought. And then at night, when the world is quiet, when I'm alone with the paper, then that's when I write. That's when I form a full poem. So I think it always starts with one tiny little thought in your
Correct.
head. So and also I'm very inspired by the everyday with the daily. So that day I had a inspiration, I would say, when I noticed that I recently played badminton and my body was sore and I could not place weight on my left leg. So I noticed that when I started walking, my body itself did not place weight on the left. That's why you limp, right? Because it's protecting you from the
Right.
pain. That was
Right.
the first time I thought that my body is protecting me from the pain, which is why. Otherwise, I could place weight on my left leg as well. It's fine. It's not gonna kill me, you know. But then I was like, this is my body's way of protecting me, of loving me, and but do I love my body? So that got me thinking. So I'm definitely going to try and write something on that.
That's interesting. That's an
So,
interesting thought. No wonder people say that poets are sensitive, isn't it?
you have to be hyper aware of yourself, I feel.
Speaking of sensitivity, you studied in Warwick University. You're an alumnus of
Um,
Warwick, right? So, were there any particular challenges that you faced as a woman, as an Asian?
um, I think once I went to get my bank account opened, that was inside Warwick as well. So this woman, she was a British woman, and she said, "You don't look Pakistani, but your accent gives you away." That's not a compliment. It's not a compliment. What do you mean? What do Pakistanis look like, or what do Indians look like? That's a very strange thing to to be on the receiving end of. So I know that the person doesn't mean harm or anything, but I think we need to be very aware of this subtle racism that comes in our daily interactions. So this stuff like that did happen, but alhamdulillah, nothing on a large, big scale in that sense. So yeah,
True.
these things
Yes,
they
sometimes
keep
it is as
happening.
subtle as that. You're right. And
Exactly.
invariably, we have heard comments like, "Oh, well, your English is so good. That's nice."
Exactly. Exactly. No, I've heard that as well. That's not a compliment. That's racism.
Right. I wanted to ask you. Besides the novel that you are currently writing, is there anything else that you're working on? And how did you come about this magic of publishing? I mean, how did you manage to take the mainstream route and then get into the mainstream publishing houses to
Uh,
publish your work?
I think that would be because of the writing community. I feel if I hadn't been a part of, if I hadn't started my own page on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, I would not have known of so many publishing companies that accept work and free of cost as well. So, I mean, the reason that we are conversing is because one kind writer decided to connect us when we were.
True.
So I think I owe it to the writing community as well. So I've learned about so many new writers who haven't been published, and they are writing beautifully. I've read their work as well on Instagram, and then I've learned about so many literary journals, so many publications, which somebody would suddenly share. I got my poem is going to be published in this, and then that's when you find out, oh, this is a journal also exists. They're pretty good journals. So that's how you start to make a list of all the journals that you could. And there's a poetry calendar. Again, another kind writer shared that. So that has daily opportunities for, or weekly opportunities for writers to send their work to. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to know most or half of these publications, or wouldn't have been able to get my work across if I wasn't on social media, and if the writing community wasn't one of the most generous and uplifting and kind communities ever.
That's true.
Yeah,
I think last week when I was speaking to Paul Jameson, we spoke about this. They're inordinately very forthcoming with your advice,
exactly.
suggestions, help,
Like,
anything for that matter.
I think every writer struggles, so I think they know how it feels to be in that, especially for young or new upcoming writer like me. I think it's very important to have a community
Right,
and people who can give you feedback as well.
right.
So, yeah.
What is the reading public like in Pakistan? Do you have many committed readers? Do you have book clubs?
We do. Again, I wouldn't have known about this if I hadn't joined social media. So there are a lot of book clubs, reading book clubs that are happening, and a lot of open mic as well, performances. Recently, there was one, and I was also part of a couple. So, but because of COVID, everything has been affected. So the open mics are not really happening anymore, but they're happening virtually now. And the reading community is, there's so many people who are reading so much. I wish I could read that much, read a lot daily. But yeah, it's a thriving readers and writers community, and it's a perfect time to be alive, I think, despite the pandemic.
I think that's one of the, if I'm allowed to say that, one of the positives of the pandemic, that it's giving people time to
Yeah.
reconnect with their own selves and to get back to reading, writing, pursue their passions basically.
Exactly, and what you're doing right now is a result of that pandemic as well. I feel that you're trying to connect writers, and you've started this virtual thing. And even on Instagram, a few of the people that I follow, they started their own. Um, they brought brilliant writers on board and asked them questions, inquisitive, insightful questions, and the public listened and the public shared. So I think this is the perfect time to learn so much as well. But again, if you can't, it's okay. It can be difficult if you don't have the motivation. It's okay.
Right. Writing cannot be forced. Like all art,
Exactly.
it has to come from within.
Exactly. It's a creative process. You can't force creativity. Exactly.
So, are you your own editor, or do you have an editor, an editing buddy?
Uh, So far, I'm my own editor. Usually, my sister reads it and then she gives me a lot of criticism, so which is great. But yeah, mostly I'm my own editor. I do have a tiny writing community. So I was selected for that workshop last year by Bilal Tanvi, who's an award-winning author. It was a 5 days residential workshop at Lungs. Uh, and that was the first time that I was part of a workshop, as in the first time that I was getting feedback from other writers.
Right.
because I don't have a degree in literature or English language, both in my undergrad and master's. So that was the first time I was actually getting feedback from my peers. So that was brilliant, and still in contact with them. And sometimes I do send my work, and sometimes they send their poetry or their short story. So it's great to be a part of that writers community as well. So yeah, kind of they're also my editors, I would say. But I haven't sent anything recently because I haven't written a lot. I've been working on this, trying to work on this book.
Right.
Yeah.
I was very intrigued by your title, How Not to Leave, the short story that you were speaking about.
Yeah.
How did you come about the title?
So that story had been in my head since a while now, but fragments of it. And that story is not just the story of one woman. I feel it's a story of so many. I mean, it's unfortunate that so many South Asian women are still experiencing domestic violence, are still living unhappy marriages. So this is a story of so many of those women. Mama is a character, which is an amalgamation of most all of these women that I've seen, I have heard about, and so that story was in my head. It had been in my head, but then one day I was just sitting and that title came to me. I guess this is what you call inspiration, how not to leave. And then that story finally started to make sense. That title gave that story direction. That title gave it that purpose, I feel. So yeah, I think I would have to thank God for that for inspiration because otherwise I would not. That story would have been in my head. Yeah,
Uh,
the title did it.
would you like to do a short book reading from that as well, of How Not to Leave, your favorite excerpt or your favorite section from the short story?
From the short story.
Yes.
Okay, let me. Happiness. Mama is 62. 62 when she decides she wants to leave him too. Housewives her age do not entertain dangerous ideas like that. What must she think every day to come to a conclusion like that? After 34 years of marriage, how miserable she must be, how heartbroken, how unloved, invisible, trapped. How must she live every day with a heavy lump in her throat, a hole in her chest, voice thick with discontent, loneliness in the blanks of her eyes, anguish in her eyelashes, ache in every strand of her hair, legs too heavy to walk with, wrists tied to her back, an exhausted heart hanging inside out. I know because I steal glances at her when she thinks I'm not looking. But where are the words to describe her unhappiness, the language to do her justice? She must have scraped strength from the insides of her intestines to think thoughts of leaving. She must have dug out courage from the core of the earth with her bare hands to birth those words. She must have decided to disembark from the unicycle. Because women like her do not allow themselves the privilege to think beyond their husband. Women like her do not allow themselves the privilege to think beyond their husband, their children's well-being, their family's izzat, because she has been making this mistake for more than half her life. But is a home not already broken when there is an absence of love? Can she think of leaving now, now that her children are almost married? Can she think of herself now? What kind of life will she live from now on? What kind of life she could have lived if it weren't for her marriage, her husband, her children, if she didn't have to give up her career, if she didn't have to put her life on hold because of them? What kind of a woman would she have been? I want to ask her that. I want her to come undone. I want to see her life unravel without me in it. She must have been unbelievably weary of walking alone on the tightrope, almost falling, almost making it to the other side. The almost life, the almost home, the almost love, the almost divorce, the almost something real. Thank you. That's it.
Beautiful. That's so achingly poignant and so beautifully.
Thank you so much.
It's very hard hitting, and I honestly feel that as women, they tend to put up with a lot of things, and there is this
In the name of
almost
sacrifice.
absolutely the idea of martyrdom. I think they subscribe to that.
Yeah, that's not how it should be.
True.
Absolutely.
True. I think
So
it's slowly beginning to change, but in very small
it's yeah,
pockets.
it is definitely beginning to change. But you're right, it's going to take some time.
True.
Mm,
Hopefully, more women begin to assert themselves, begin to see value in being individuals first.
exactly, that's true.
Right. So, what would your suggestion be to up and coming writers?
Um, to up and coming writers, I would say, because writers write about so many similar things like heartbreak and love and loss, trauma, grief, etc. I would say find your own particular way of writing about these things, your own voice. So demystify those cliches and those tropes, deconstruct them, and write them in your own particular way. That is how you find your voice. And that would be my message to writers.
True. Fair enough. Fair enough. Having said that, who is your biggest fan and biggest critic? You did mention that your sister does your editing. She gets to read your work.
Yeah, she's my fan and critic, I feel, because she definitely is. Yeah, as for my family, they don't usually read my work, but my sister does. And yeah, I would say she's my biggest support and fan as well as my best friend, who's been to all of my open mic performances and all.
Right.
Yeah, she's been a good support.
Is she a writer in the making too?
No, she's not.
All right, all right. Any special message for the writer talks?
I think you're doing a brilliant job. Like I said, I think this is the time to get into writers' heads and try and understand the struggles that they experienced and what they made out of it. So, like people like me who was just starting out in a way, it's very inspiring. It's very empowering as well to learn that so many brilliant writers have had their low points, have received a lot of rejections as well. So I think this is a perfect way, perfect platform to try and understand writers as humans as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a real pleasure having you, and thank you for all those wonderful,
The
lovely
pleasure
encouraging
was
words.
mine. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Ahoy, take care.
Bye. Take care as well.